Sometimes, the person carrying the heaviest burden is the one everyone overlooks. Emily Carter never expected one ordinary morning to change the direction of her life. She had faced difficult days before, but this one felt different. The alarm rang at 5:30 in the morning inside her small Boston apartment. Before the sun reached the windows, she was already awake, preparing everything she needed for the day ahead. Her coffee sat untouched on the kitchen counter while she packed her work bag, checked her daughter's things, and looked at the clock again and again. She had a meeting at Whitmore Global that morning. She had responsibilities. She had a job she could not afford to lose. Then her phone lit up with a message that changed her plans. The childcare provider she depended on would not be available that day. Emily stared at the screen quietly. For a moment, she felt the weight of every decision a single mother carried. She could stay home and risk disappointing her employer, or she could find another way. She looked at her young daughter sleeping peacefully nearby and took a deep breath. She whispered softly, "We are going to figure this out." A few hours later, Emily walked through the glass doors of Whitmore Global with her baby in her arms. The building was everything the company represented. Tall ceilings. Modern design. Employees moving quickly with coffee cups and folders in their hands. It was a place built around efficiency and professionalism. And that morning, a young mother carrying her child stood in the middle of it all. Some employees looked surprised. Others simply continued with their busy schedules. Emily did not want attention. She did not want anyone to think she was asking for special treatment. She only wanted to complete her work and take care of her daughter. Across the building, Alexander Whitmore was beginning his day the way he always did. The Billionaire CEO reviewed reports, attended meetings, and made decisions that affected thousands of employees. He had built Whitmore Global through discipline and determination. To him, business was about results. Numbers. Growth. Performance. People often described him as brilliant, focused, and impossible to distract. But that morning, something caught his attention. As Alexander walked through the office, he saw Emily sitting at her desk. Her laptop was open. Documents were organized beside her. Her baby rested safely nearby while she carefully completed her assignments. He expected to see a problem. Instead, he saw dedication. He watched as Emily helped a coworker answer a question before returning to her own responsibilities. She did not complain. She did not ask anyone to understand her situation. She simply continued working. Alexander stopped for a moment. It was only a few seconds, but something about the scene stayed with him. He had spent years studying companies, markets, and strategies. But he had rarely stopped to consider the personal stories behind the people who helped build his success. He did not know Emily's story yet. He did not know that the woman quietly working in the corner of his office would challenge everything he believed about leadership. And Emily did not know that the billionaire CEO watching from a distance was about to see his company, and himself, in a completely different way. The first thing Alexander Whitmore noticed was not the baby. It was the determination behind the woman holding her. For the rest of the day, the image stayed in his mind. A mother trying to balance two worlds at once. An employee carrying responsibilities that were never written in a company report. Alexander had seen thousands of people walk through the doors of Whitmore Global, but he had rarely stopped to wonder what they carried with them beyond their work. The next morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. The city of Boston was still waking up as he entered the quiet executive floor. His assistant, Lauren Mitchell, placed a stack of reports on his desk and began reviewing the schedule. Meetings. Financial updates. Business decisions. Everything looked exactly the same as every other day. But Alexander was different. He found himself looking beyond the numbers. During a meeting with department managers, he asked questions he had never asked before. "How are our employees doing?" The room became quiet for a moment. Most discussions at that level were about deadlines, revenue, and performance goals. Nobody expected a question about people. One manager answered carefully. "The teams are working hard. Results have been strong." Alexander nodded, but the answer felt incomplete. Results were important. He knew that better than anyone. But he started wondering what it took for people to create those results. Later that afternoon, Alexander walked through the administration department again. He noticed Emily Carter sitting at her desk. Her baby was resting nearby while she organized documents and responded to emails. She moved carefully, making sure her work remained accurate. A coworker approached her with a question about a project. Emily immediately paused what she was doing and helped. She did not seem distracted. She seemed committed. Alexander watched quietly from a distance. "Who is she?" he asked Lauren, who was walking beside him. Lauren looked toward Emily's desk. "Her name is Emily Carter. She has worked here for almost 3 years." Alexander looked surprised. 3 years? "Yes," Lauren replied. "Her performance reviews have always been excellent. She is reliable and often helps other employees." That answer changed the way Alexander saw the situation. He had expected to learn about an exception. Instead, he discovered someone who had been contributing to the company long before he noticed her. That evening, Alexander reviewed Emily's employee file. He saw consistent results, positive feedback, and a history of dedication. There was nothing in the records that suggested weakness. There was only evidence of someone who had continued moving forward despite challenges. Meanwhile, Emily finished another long day and returned home with her daughter. She prepared dinner, organized things for the next morning, and quietly planned how to make everything work. She did not know that the CEO of the company had looked through her file. She did not know that a small moment in the office had caused someone with enormous influence to question his own understanding of leadership. For Emily, it was just another day of doing her best. For Alexander, it was the beginning of a lesson he never expected to learn. He had spent years building a company around efficiency and achievement. But now he was beginning to understand that behind every successful organization were people with stories that numbers could never explain. Emily Carter never wanted to be noticed. She had spent years learning how to keep moving quietly, solving problems before anyone else saw them, and carrying responsibilities without asking for attention. But sometimes, the people who try the hardest to remain unseen are the ones who reveal the strongest stories. A few days after Alexander Whitmore discovered her employee record, he found himself paying closer attention to the people around him. Not as a CEO reviewing performance numbers, but as a person trying to understand the lives behind those numbers. During a morning walk through the company, Alexander noticed something that surprised him. Emily was not only completing her own work. She was helping others succeed. A new employee in the department struggled with a complicated process, and Emily patiently explained each step. She did not rush. She did not make the person feel embarrassed. She simply helped. Alexander watched from a distance, and remembered something his grandfather once told him. "The best leaders are not the ones who speak the loudest. They are the ones who notice what others miss." For years, Alexander believed leadership was about making difficult decisions and maintaining control. He had built Whitmore Global into a successful company because he understood markets, strategies, and competition. But he was beginning to realize that he had spent less time understanding the people who made those achievements possible. Later that afternoon, Alexander asked Lauren to arrange a brief conversation with Emily. When Emily entered his office, she looked uncertain. She had met executives before, but a private conversation with the CEO was unexpected. Alexander invited her to sit down and thanked her for her work. Emily politely replied that she was only doing her job. That answer caught his attention. "You say that as if it is simple," Alexander said. Emily smiled slightly. "Sometimes doing your best is the only thing you can control." Her words stayed with him. Alexander asked about her experience at the company. Emily shared that she enjoyed her work and appreciated the opportunities she had received. She did not complain about challenges. She did not blame anyone for difficult moments. Instead, she spoke about finding solutions. She spoke about teamwork. She spoke about gratitude. Alexander realized that Emily was not looking for someone to fix her life. She was already fighting for her future every day. She only needed a workplace that understood people could have responsibilities beyond the office. After the conversation ended, Emily returned to her desk and continued her work. To her, it was just another meeting. But for Alexander, it was different. He sat alone in his office and looked out at the city below. The buildings represented everything he had achieved. The company represented years of ambition and sacrifice. Yet one conversation with a single mother had made him question whether success was only about what a company could earn, or whether it was also about how a company treated the people who helped build it. Alexander did not have all the answers yet. But for the first time in many years, he was asking the right questions. For most of his career, Alexander Whitmore believed that every challenge had a solution if he looked at the right numbers. A financial report could reveal a weakness. A market analysis could reveal an opportunity. A carefully planned strategy could move an entire company forward. But after meeting Emily Carter, he began to notice something his reports had never shown him. The most important details were often the ones that never appeared on a spreadsheet. Over the following weeks, Alexander started observing Whitmore Global differently. He walked through departments without rushing from one meeting to another. He listened to conversations between employees. He noticed the small moments that kept the company running every day. He saw people staying late to finish projects. He saw employees helping each other without expecting recognition. And more than anything, he saw how many people carried personal responsibilities while still giving their best at work. One afternoon, Alexander joined a leadership meeting where the executives discussed improving productivity. The conversation quickly turned toward deadlines and performance targets. Those things mattered, but something felt incomplete. Alexander looked around the conference room and asked a simple question. What are we doing to make sure our employees can succeed both inside and outside this building? The room became quiet. Some executives exchanged uncertain looks. They were used to discussing profits, expansion, and competition. They were not used to discussing the human side of business. One executive, Richard Hayes, carefully responded that the company already provided competitive benefits and professional opportunities. Alexander appreciated the answer, but he knew there was more to understand. After the meeting, he continued thinking about Emily's words. Sometimes doing your best is the only thing you can control. That sentence stayed with him because it represented something he had forgotten. Not everyone started from the same place. Not everyone had the same support system. Yet many people still showed up every day and gave everything they had. Meanwhile, Emily continued her routine. She arrived at work, completed her responsibilities, and cared for her daughter. She never knew that her actions had started a conversation among the highest levels of the company. She was not trying to create change. She was simply living according to her values. One evening, Alexander reviewed several employee surveys that had been collected over the past year. He noticed a pattern. Many employees were grateful for their jobs, but some struggled with balancing personal responsibilities and professional expectations. The information had always been there. He had simply never looked at it from the right perspective. For the first time, Alexander understood that leadership was not only about creating a successful company. It was about creating an environment where people had the opportunity to succeed. The next morning, he asked his team to begin exploring new ways to support employees. He did not have a complete plan yet. He did not have all the answers. But he knew one thing. The woman who walked into his office carrying her baby had shown him a truth he had ignored for years. Behind every employee was a story. Behind every story was a person. And a company that forgot that would never truly understand success. The decision to change something inside Whitmore Global sounded simple when Alexander Whitmore first mentioned it. But he quickly learned that meaningful change was never as easy as making a single announcement. Behind every new idea were questions, concerns, and people who needed to understand why the change mattered. For years, Alexander had been the person who made decisions quickly and expected everyone to follow. But this time, he chose a different approach. He listened first. The following week, Alexander asked his leadership team to review employee feedback and explore ways to create a more supportive workplace. The goal was not to lower expectations. The goal was to help employees reach those expectations without feeling like they had to choose between their responsibilities and their careers. Some executives supported the idea immediately. Others were uncertain. Richard Hayes, one of the company's senior leaders, believed the company had succeeded because it focused on discipline and efficiency. "We built this company by staying competitive," Richard said during a meeting. "We have to be careful not to lose sight of that." Alexander understood the concern. He had once thought the same way. He knew that business required focus. He knew that growth required decisions. But he also knew that ignoring the people behind the numbers created problems that could not always be seen right away. "Taking care of people does not mean lowering standards," Alexander replied. "It means giving people a better chance to meet them." Meanwhile, Emily Carter continued her work without knowing how much attention her experience had created. She still arrived each morning with her daughter, still organized her tasks carefully, and still helped coworkers whenever she could. To Emily, kindness was not a strategy. It was simply how she believed people should treat each other. One afternoon, Lauren asked Emily if she would be willing to share her thoughts in a small employee discussion group. Emily was surprised. She had never imagined that her personal situation would interest company leaders. "I am not sure I have anything special to offer," Emily admitted. Lauren smiled. "That is exactly why your perspective matters." During the discussion, Emily did not speak about needing special treatment. She spoke about understanding. She explained that many employees were doing their best while managing responsibilities outside the workplace. She talked about how small changes could make people feel trusted and valued. Everyone listened carefully, including several managers who had never considered those challenges before. Alexander watched quietly from the other side of the room. He noticed something important. Emily was not asking the company to make life easier for her alone. She was encouraging the company to understand the experiences of many employees. That moment confirmed something Alexander had started to realize. The best ideas did not always come from the highest position in the room. Sometimes they came from the person who understood the situation most deeply. As the meeting ended, Alexander looked around the room and saw a different future for Whitmore Global. A future where success and compassion could exist together. But he also knew changing a company built over many years would not happen overnight. There would be questions. There would be resistance. And there would be people who wondered if this new direction was the right one. Alexander was ready for that challenge. Because for the first time, he was not just building a bigger company. He was building a better one. The first signs of change inside Whitmore Global did not come from a major announcement or a dramatic decision. They came from small moments that most people would have ignored. A manager taking time to listen. An employee feeling comfortable sharing an idea. A team member realizing they were not facing every challenge alone. For Alexander Whitmore, those small moments represented something much bigger. They showed him that leadership was not only about creating results. It was about creating trust. In the weeks after the employee discussion, Alexander continued working with his leadership team to develop new programs that supported employees while maintaining the company's high standards. He wanted every decision to be practical, thoughtful, and sustainable. This was not about changing the identity of Whitmore Global. It was about understanding the people who made the company successful. Some executives remained unsure. They believed Alexander was allowing emotions to influence business decisions. Richard Hayes especially questioned whether these changes would affect productivity. "Our responsibility is to protect the company's future," Richard said during a private conversation. Alexander listened carefully before responding. "That is exactly what I am trying to do. A company's future depends on the people who build it every day." Those words reflected a change that even Alexander noticed within himself. Years earlier, he might have ended the conversation with a simple decision. He might have relied only on authority. But now he understood that strong leadership required more than giving answers. It required understanding different perspectives. Meanwhile, Emily Carter continued to be the same person she had always been. She did not seek recognition. She did not ask people to notice her efforts. She simply continued showing up, completing her work, and caring for her daughter. But slowly, people around her began to notice. Co-workers started sharing how her patience and kindness had influenced them. New employees felt more comfortable asking questions because Emily always made them feel respected. She became an example of something Alexander wanted the entire company to embrace. Success was not only about individual achievement. It was also about how people helped each other move forward. One afternoon, Alexander visited the administration department and saw Emily helping a colleague prepare for an important presentation. She was not required to do it. It was not part of her official responsibilities. She helped because she believed people deserved support when they needed it. Alexander stood nearby for a moment and remembered the first day. He saw her. Back then, he thought he was witnessing a difficult situation. Now he understood he had been witnessing character. Later that evening, Alexander sat in his office reviewing the progress of the new initiatives. The city lights reflected across the windows, and he thought about how much his perspective had changed. The company had always been filled with talented people. The difference was that he had finally started seeing them. He realized that leadership was not about standing above everyone else. It was about standing with them. But Alexander also knew the hardest part was still ahead. Changing policies was one thing. Changing beliefs was another. Some people would continue to question his choices. Some would resist the new direction. And soon, those doubts would challenge whether Alexander truly believed in the lesson he had learned from one unexpected moment with a single mother and her baby. The greatest changes often begin with the smallest voices. For years, Alexander Whitmore believed important decisions belonged in executive offices, surrounded by experienced leaders and carefully prepared reports. But now, he was learning that some of the most valuable insights came from people who experienced the company differently every day. That realization became even clearer when he invited employees from different departments to share their thoughts about the future of Whitmore Global. The meeting was not held in the large executive conference room. Alexander wanted a different environment. He wanted people to feel comfortable speaking honestly. Among those invited was Emily Carter. When she entered the room, she looked slightly surprised to see executives waiting for her. She was not used to being included in conversations like this. She was simply an employee who came to work each day, completed her responsibilities, and cared for her daughter. But Alexander knew something others had overlooked. Emily understood the company from a perspective that leadership reports could never fully capture. During the discussion, several employees shared ideas about improving communication and creating better support systems. Emily listened carefully before offering her thoughts. She explained that many employees wanted to do their best, but sometimes life outside the workplace created challenges that were invisible to others. She did not speak with frustration. She spoke with understanding. People work harder when they feel respected, Emily said. When they know they matter, they want to give their best. The room became quiet. Her words were simple, but they carried meaning. Alexander looked around the table and noticed several leaders taking notes. For some of them, this was the first time they had considered these issues from an employee's perspective. After the meeting, one executive approached Alexander and admitted that he had never thought about workplace challenges in that way before. Alexander smiled. That is exactly why conversations like this matter. But not everyone welcomed the changes. Some senior leaders worried that focusing on employee needs would distract from business goals. They believed successful companies required strict expectations and complete focus on performance. Richard Hayes continued to question Alexander's new approach. He respected Alexander's leadership, but he believed the company was moving into uncertain territory. We cannot forget what made this company successful, Richard said. Alexander looked at him and calmly replied, I have not forgotten. I am remembering something we ignored. That sentence stayed with Richard. Meanwhile, Emily returned to her normal routine. She never realized that her words had created discussions among the highest levels of the company. She was not trying to influence executives. She was not trying to become a symbol of change. She was simply sharing what she believed. As weeks passed, more employees began participating in conversations about the company's future. People who once stayed quiet started sharing ideas. Teams became more connected. Small improvements began appearing across different departments. Alexander watched these changes carefully. He knew the transformation was still incomplete. A company culture built over decades would not change instantly. But something important had already happened. People were beginning to feel heard. And Alexander understood that the woman who once walked into his building carrying her baby had given him something more valuable than advice. She had given him a new way to see leadership. Yet he also knew that choosing a different path would require courage, because the next challenge would come from those who feared change the most. The hardest part of changing a company was never creating a new idea. It was convincing people to believe in it. Alexander Whitmore understood that better than ever as the first results of the new employee initiatives began appearing throughout Whitmore Global. The changes were small, but they carried a meaning that could not be measured on a financial report. Employees were communicating more openly. Managers were paying closer attention. Teams that once worked separately were beginning to support each other. For Alexander, it was proof that a company could become stronger when people felt valued. But not everyone saw it that way. During a leadership meeting one Monday morning, several executives gathered to review the progress. The conversation started positively, but the mood changed when Richard Hayes raised his concerns. He believed the company was moving away from the principles that had created its success. "I respect the intention behind these changes," Richard said, "but we have to make sure we are still focused on growth." Alexander listened without interrupting. Years ago, he might have responded immediately. He might have defended his decision simply because he was the CEO. But now he understood the importance of hearing concerns before making judgments. "Growth matters," Alexander replied. "But long-term growth depends on the people who create it." The room became quiet. Some executives agreed. Others remained uncertain. Alexander knew that changing opinions would take time. Meanwhile, Emily Carter continued becoming an unexpected source of inspiration inside the company. She never asked for recognition, but people naturally began looking to her for guidance. New employees appreciated her patience. Coworkers trusted her honesty. She had a way of making people feel comfortable, even during difficult conversations. One afternoon, Alexander passed by her department and saw Emily helping a new employee prepare for an important project. She explained each detail carefully, making sure the employee understood instead of simply giving instructions. Alexander watched for a moment and smiled. He realized Emily was demonstrating the type of leadership he wanted throughout the company. It was not based on authority. It was based on respect. Later that day, Alexander asked Emily to join a small internal discussion about workplace culture. She hesitated at first. She still saw herself as an ordinary employee, not someone who belonged in important conversations. "I am not sure I am the right person for this," Emily admitted. Alexander looked at her and said, "That is exactly why you are the right person. You understand what many of us never had to experience." Emily thought about his words. She agreed to participate, not because she wanted attention, but because she believed people deserved to be heard. As the company continued moving forward, Alexander noticed something unexpected. The biggest changes were not coming from new policies or formal announcements. They were coming from people treating each other differently every day. A manager showing more patience. An employee offering support. A team taking time to understand one another. Alexander had spent years believing success came from having the strongest strategy. Now he understood that success also came from having the strongest connection between people. But as the company changed, some questions remained. Could a billionaire CEO truly transform the culture of a company built on decades of tradition? And would the people who resisted change eventually understand why this new direction mattered? Alexander knew the answer would not come from another meeting or another report. It would come from the choices he made when the pressure became greater. The moment Alexander Whitmore realized that change required more than good intentions came during a quiet morning meeting inside Whitmore Global. The reports on the table showed positive signs. Employee engagement was improving. Teams were communicating better. Small improvements were appearing across the company. But Alexander knew numbers only showed part of the story. The real test was whether people believed the change was genuine. Inside the executive office, some leaders remained uncertain. They respected Alexander's vision, but they worried about the future. They wondered if focusing more on employees would create unnecessary complications. Richard Hayes, who had spent decades helping build the company, felt especially cautious. He believed protecting the company's success meant holding tightly to the methods that had worked before. "A strong company needs consistency," Richard said during the discussion. "We cannot allow emotions to guide every decision." Alexander looked across the room and understood why Richard felt that way. He had once believed the same thing. But his perspective had changed. "Understanding people is not replacing business decisions," Alexander replied. "It is making better ones." The conversation continued, but Alexander knew some concerns could not be solved with words alone. People needed to see the results. They needed to experience the difference. Meanwhile, Emily Carter had no idea that her presence had become connected to such important conversations. She continued focusing on her responsibilities. Every morning, she arrived at the office, organized her schedule, cared for her daughter, and supported her coworkers. She never considered herself someone who inspired others. She simply believed that everyone deserved patience and respect. One afternoon, a young employee approached Emily after struggling with a difficult assignment. The employee admitted feeling overwhelmed and unsure. Emily listened carefully and shared her own experience. She explained that challenges did not mean someone was failing. Sometimes they meant someone was learning. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it gave the employee new confidence. Alexander happened to see the interaction while walking through the office. Once again, he noticed something important. Emily was creating the kind of workplace culture he had been trying to design through policies and meetings. She was doing it naturally through the way she treated people. That evening, Alexander reviewed the company's progress. He realized the transformation was not happening because of one announcement or one executive decision. It was happening because people were choosing to treat each other differently. A company could create guidelines, but real culture came from daily actions. However, Alexander also knew the next step would be the most difficult. The company was preparing to officially introduce several new employee support programs, and not everyone would agree. Some leaders still believed the changes were unnecessary. Some employees wondered if the promises would last. Alexander understood that trust was not built through speeches. It was built through consistency. As he looked over the city from his office window, he thought about the unexpected lesson that started this journey. A single mother walking into his building with her baby had shown him something he had overlooked for years. Behind every position was a person. Behind every person was a story. And now Alexander had to prove that he truly believed it. Because changing a company was not just about creating new policies. It was about having the courage to protect the values behind them. The day Alexander Whitmore officially presented the new employee support initiatives arrived with more pressure than he expected. The conference room was filled with executives, managers, and department leaders from across Whitmore Global. Everyone understood that the announcement represented a significant shift in how the company viewed its people. But not everyone knew whether they were ready to embrace it. Alexander stood at the front of the room and looked around. Years earlier, he would have focused only on the business impact. He would have talked about efficiency, performance, and financial goals. Those things still mattered. But now he understood there was another important question. How did the company make people feel while they worked toward those goals? "A successful company is built by successful people," Alexander began. "And successful people need an environment where they can do their best." He explained the changes carefully. The company would provide more flexibility for employees managing personal responsibilities. Managers would receive better guidance on supporting their teams. Employees would have more opportunities to share ideas and concerns. These were not promises without planning. They were practical steps designed to strengthen the company from within. As Alexander continued speaking, Emily Carter watched from her seat among several employees. She still found it difficult to believe that her experience had helped inspire such a conversation. She never intended to become part of a company-wide change. She had only wanted to keep her job, care for her daughter, and do her best every day. After the meeting ended, the reactions were mixed. Many employees felt encouraged. They appreciated that leadership was finally discussing challenges they had quietly faced for years. Others remained cautious, wondering if the changes would truly last. Richard Hayes approached Alexander afterward. His expression was thoughtful. "I understand why you believe in this," Richard said. "But changing a company culture is not simple." Alexander nodded. "I know. That is why we have to be consistent." Richard looked toward the employees leaving the room. For the first time, he noticed something different. People were not just discussing a new policy. They were discussing feeling valued. Meanwhile, Emily returned to her department and continued working. Several coworkers thanked her for sharing her perspective. She felt uncomfortable receiving attention because she believed she had only spoken honestly. One colleague told her, "You help people feel like the company sees them." Emily smiled and replied, "I think everyone just wants to know they matter." Those words stayed with the people who heard them. Later that evening, Alexander reviewed feedback from employees after the announcement. Some comments were expected. Some were surprising. But one message stood out. An employee wrote that, for the first time, they felt the company was trying to understand the person behind the position. Alexander read that sentence several times. It reminded him how far the company had come. The journey had started with one unexpected morning. A mother carrying her baby through the doors of a corporate building. A CEO noticing a moment he might have ignored before. Now, that moment had grown into something much larger. But Alexander knew the real challenge was not announcing change. It was proving that the change was real. Because trust was not created by what leaders promised in a meeting. Trust was created by what they did after everyone stopped watching. Trust was not built in a single day, and Alexander Whitmore knew that better than anyone. After the announcement, he expected questions, hesitation, and even disagreement. What he did not expect was how quickly small changes would begin affecting the atmosphere inside Whitmore Global. The difference was not something that appeared in financial reports. It appeared in conversations, in relationships, and in the way people approached their daily work. Several weeks passed, and Alexander started noticing moments that would have gone unnoticed before. A manager taking extra time to understand an employee's concern. A team working together instead of struggling separately. Employees sharing ideas because they believed someone would actually listen. These moments were simple, but they represented something powerful. The company was beginning to change from the inside. Emily Carter continued to play her part without seeking attention. She still arrived each morning with her daughter, organized her responsibilities, and supported her coworkers. But now, more people recognized the qualities that had always been there. Her patience. Her reliability. Her ability to make people feel respected. One afternoon, Alexander invited Emily to join a meeting with several department leaders. She entered the room carrying the same calm confidence she had shown from the beginning. Some executives still saw her as an employee who had become part of a company discussion by circumstance. But Alexander saw something different. He saw someone who understood the human side of the workplace better than many people who had spent years studying business. During the meeting, leaders discussed the progress of the new programs. Some departments reported improved communication. Others shared examples of employees becoming more engaged with their teams. Emily listened carefully before sharing her thoughts. "People want to contribute," she said. "Sometimes they just need to know their effort is noticed." The room became quiet for a moment. Alexander looked around and saw several leaders reflecting on her words. They were not complicated. They were not based on a complicated strategy. They were simply true. Later that day, Richard Hayes approached Alexander. His opinion had not completely changed, but something was different. I have been thinking about what you said, Richard admitted. Maybe we focus so much on maintaining success that we forgot what created it. Alexander appreciated the honesty. He knew change did not require everyone to agree immediately. It required people to be willing to consider a different perspective. Meanwhile, Emily's daughter continued growing and becoming more curious about the world around her. Emily often explained that kindness mattered, even in small moments. She wanted her daughter to understand that success was not only about achievements. It was also about how people treated others along the way. Alexander heard those words one evening during a company family event. He watched employees spending time with their families and realized something important. The company was no longer just a place where people completed tasks. It was becoming a community where people felt connected. Standing among employees and their families, Alexander thought about the journey that brought him there. He had built a successful company by understanding business. But Emily had taught him that understanding people was just as important. The woman who once walked into his office carrying a baby had shown him a lesson that no business course could teach. A company could have impressive numbers, modern buildings, and global recognition. But its greatest strength would always come from the people inside it. And Alexander knew the next chapter would not be about proving that change was possible. It would be about showing that change could last. The greatest lessons in life often arrive quietly. They do not come with announcements or moments that everyone notices. Sometimes they begin with a simple decision made by someone who never expected to make a difference. For Alexander Whitmore, that lesson began with a morning he would never forget. But as time passed, he realized the true meaning of that moment was not about what he had done for Emily Carter. It was about what Emily had revealed about the kind of leader he wanted to become. Months after the first changes began, Whitmore Global continued moving in a new direction. The company was still focused on growth, innovation, and excellence. But now, there was something different beneath the surface. People felt more connected. Employees felt comfortable sharing ideas. Managers became more aware of the challenges their teams faced outside the office. The company had not become successful by lowering expectations. It had become stronger by understanding the people responsible for reaching those expectations. Alexander noticed the difference every day. He no longer walked through the building only thinking about deadlines and results. He noticed conversations. He noticed teamwork. He noticed moments of kindness that had always existed but had often been overlooked. One afternoon, he saw Emily helping a group of new employees adjust to their roles. She explained procedures, answered questions, and encouraged them when they felt uncertain. She did not act like someone trying to prove her importance. She acted like someone who genuinely wanted others to succeed. Alexander watched for a moment and remembered the first time he saw her. Back then, he saw a situation that seemed unusual. Now, he saw a person who represented everything he wanted the company to value. Later that week, Alexander invited Emily to his office for a conversation. This time, she did not seem nervous. She had become more comfortable knowing that her voice mattered. Alexander thanked her for everything she had contributed. Emily smiled and replied that she had only been honest about her experience. "That honesty changed the way I lead this company," Alexander said. Emily looked surprised. "I never expected that." Alexander nodded. "Neither did I." The conversation reminded him of something important. Real change rarely begins with someone trying to become powerful. It often begins with someone simply choosing to be genuine. Meanwhile, Emily continued building a life for herself and her daughter. She remained focused on her family, her career, and the values she believed in. She never forgot the difficult days that shaped her, but she also never allowed those moments to define her future. One evening, Alexander attended a company gathering where employees and their families came together. He looked around the room and saw something he had never considered when he first built the company. Success was not only found in expansion, recognition, or financial achievements. Success was also found in trust. It was found in people feeling respected. It was found in creating an environment where individuals could bring their full selves to work. As the evening ended, Alexander stood near the entrance and watched employees leave with their families. He thought about how different everything felt compared to the day Emily walked through those doors carrying her baby. He had once believed that leaders changed organizations through decisions alone. Now he understood something deeper. Leaders changed organizations by changing what they valued. And because one single mother showed him the importance of seeing people beyond their circumstances, a billionaire finally understood that the greatest investment was never only in business. It was in humanity. Years later, when Alexander Whitmore looked back on his journey, he realized the most important moments of his life were not the ones recorded in business reports or celebrated at company events. They were the quiet moments when he learned something new about people. A conversation. A simple act of kindness. A reminder that every person carried a story that others might never see. Whitmore Global continued to grow, becoming even more successful while maintaining the values that had changed the company from within. The new approach was no longer viewed as an experiment. It had become part of the company's identity. Employees trusted their leaders more. Managers understood their teams better. The workplace had become a place where people felt respected, not just measured. Alexander often thought about how different his perspective was compared to the man he used to be. He once believed success was created by having the best strategies, the strongest plans, and the ability to make difficult decisions alone. Those things had helped him build his company, but they had not taught him everything he needed to know. Emily Carter had shown him the missing piece. A company was not only built by ideas, investments, or ambition. It was built by people who showed up every day and gave their best, even when life was not easy. Emily never considered herself someone who changed the world. She still lived the same way she always had. She cared for her daughter. She worked hard. She treated people with patience and respect. But that simple way of living had created an impact far beyond what she imagined. One afternoon, Alexander visited the administration department and saw Emily helping another employee who was facing a difficult moment. He smiled because he recognized the same kindness he had seen years earlier. The difference was that now, he understood its value. "You know," Alexander said, "I used to think leadership was about having all the answers." Emily looked at him and smiled. "And now?" Alexander looked around the office filled with people working together. "Now I think leadership is about knowing which questions to ask." Emily nodded. She understood exactly what he meant. The lesson had never been about one person saving another. It had been about two people from different worlds teaching each other something important. The billionaire CEO had learned compassion from the single mother. The single mother had gained opportunities because someone finally noticed her strength. But both had changed because they were willing to see beyond appearances. On a quiet evening, Alexander stood near the windows of his office overlooking Boston. The city lights reflected against the glass, reminding him of the years he had spent chasing success. He was proud of what he had built, but he was even more grateful for what he had learned. Money could create opportunities. Leadership could create change. But kindness could create connections that lasted far beyond any achievement. He thought about the morning when Emily walked into his building carrying her baby. At the time, he thought he was witnessing someone who needed help. Years later, he understood he was witnessing someone who had something to teach him. Because sometimes the person we think we are helping is actually the person helping us become better. And sometimes, one unexpected moment is enough to remind us that true success is not measured by what we own, but by the lives we touch and the humanity we choose to protect.